Gulmarkai lived in a small, peaceful village nestled between endless fields and a dense forest. The serenity of her surroundings only highlighted the chaos within her home. The village, with its quiet lanes and chirping birds, seemed like the perfect place for a young girl to grow up. Yet for Gulmarkai, it was a place filled with shadows of pain and longing. Her mother had passed away when she was very young, and her father had remarried soon after. His new wife, Sholaidolai, was as cold as the winter winds that swept through their village. Unlike the warmth and care of her real mother, Sholaidolai's presence felt like a constant weight on Gulmarkai's heart. She had grown up under the harsh hand of her stepmother, who never hesitated to remind her of her place in the household. Sholaidolai was not just stern, she was cruel in ways that others could see but never dared to speak of. Her eyes were cold, her words sharp, and her actions even colder. Gulmarkai was forced to do all the chores, often staying up late into the night, exhausted from the constant demands. Her stepmother showed no affection, no kindness. It was as if Gulmarkai didn't belong, and Sholaidolai made sure she knew it every single day. The villagers could see the mistreatment. They saw the bruises on Gulmarkai's hands from hours of labor, the sadness that clouded her once bright eyes, and the loneliness that hung around her like a fog. Yet no one spoke up. Sholaidolai had a certain power in the village, a kind of authority that made people wary of crossing her. The fear she instilled in others kept them silent, even when they knew what was happening was wrong. Gulmarkai's heart ached every day, longing for a life where she was loved and cherished, not a servant to her stepmother's whims. But as the days passed, she started to realize that her suffering was not just because of her stepmother's cruelty. There was something darker at play, something deeper than mere hatred. And little did she know, the torment she was facing was just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous truth waiting to unfold. Gulmarkai's days were filled with never-ending toil. Every morning before the sun even rose, she was up cleaning, washing, and preparing for the day ahead. There were no breaks, no moments of rest. Sholaidolai, her stepmother, would always find something for her to do, whether it was scrubbing the floors until her hands bled, or fetching water from the well, which was miles away. If Gulmarkai even dared to slow down, Sholaidolai would reprimand her with cruel words, calling her lazy and worthless. Even at meals, Gulmarkai was treated as an afterthought. The food was always scarce, and whatever little there was, Sholaidolai made sure to eat first. Gulmarkai was given scraps, barely enough to fill her stomach. At times, she would watch her stepmother and father eat, their plates heaping with food while she sat quietly, her stomach growling in hunger. Sholaidolai would often mock her for being too thin, telling her that she would never amount to anything, that she was nothing but a burden to the household. The humiliation cut deeper than any words could, but Gulmarkai swallowed it all. She learned early on that speaking up only made things worse. Her stepmother's verbal abuse was relentless. If Gulmarkai made the slightest mistake, burning the bread, spilling water, Sholaidolai would lash out, calling her names, reminding her that she was nothing more than a servant. There were days when Gulmarkai would break down in silence, her eyes burning with the tears she refused to shed in front of Sholaidolai. But she quickly learned that tears would only make her appear weak, so she kept them hidden. She couldn't afford to show vulnerability. It would only give Sholaidolai more ammunition to use against her. In the quiet moments when she was alone, Gulmarkai would often find herself lost in memories of her mother. She could still remember the warmth of her embrace, the gentle way her mother would speak to her, and the soft laughter they shared together. Life had been simpler then, peaceful. She would close her eyes and imagine the way her mother would comfort her after a long day, her voice like a soothing lullaby, telling her that everything would be okay. But those days felt like a distant dream now, lost in the past. Now there was only Sholaidolai's harsh voice and the constant sense of fear that gripped her heart. Despite the cruelty, Gulmarkai's spirit had not broken. There was something inside her, a quiet strength that kept her going. She had learned to endure, to accept the harshness of her life, and to carry on without complaint. But deep down, she dreamed of something more. She dreamed of escaping the house, of leaving Sholaidolai behind and finding a place where she could be free, where she could be loved. Yet, the thought of escape seemed impossible. Where could she go? Who would take her in? The world outside her village felt like an unknown, full of dangers she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The villagers, too, noticed Gulmakai's suffering. They saw how tired she was, how pale and thin she had become over the years. Some of them whispered among themselves, sharing pitying glances whenever they saw her pass by. They knew what Sholaidolai was like. They had heard the rumours of her cruelty, of her cold, domineering nature. But none of them dared to intervene. Sholaidolai's power was well known, and the thought of standing up to her was enough to keep the villagers silent. Fear held them back, a fear of retribution they could not afford to ignore. They did not want to risk their own safety, so they chose to remain silent, pretending not to notice the girl's suffering. And so, Gulmakai endured, alone in her pain, with only her dreams of freedom to keep her going. Every day, as she worked through the endless chores, Gulmakai couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever care enough to help her. Would she ever escape this torment? Would she ever know what it felt like to be truly loved again? These questions echoed in her mind, unanswered, as the days dragged on. As Gulmakai grew older, her once simple life became filled with unsettling questions. The more she endured at the hands of her stepmother, Sholaidolai, the more she began to notice strange things, things she couldn't easily explain. The air around Sholaidolai always seemed thick with mystery. At times, when the wind howled through the trees or when the sky grew dark, Gulmakai would catch glimpses of her stepmother standing by the window, staring out into the night with an unsettling intensity. It was as if Sholaidolai was waiting for something. No, someone. And her presence was like a shadow that clung to the edges of the room, never fully revealed. The village elders often whispered behind their doors, speaking in hushed tones about Sholaidolai's past. Gulmakai had overheard fragments of their conversations. Words like darkness, rituals, and forbidden magic caught her attention. She didn't fully understand what these words meant, but the fear in the elders' voices was enough to make her shiver. There was something sinister about Sholaidolai's past, something she had hidden away from the world. The more Gulmakai thought about it, the more she realized that her stepmother's cruelty was not just the product of a bitter woman's nature. It was deeper, tied to something far more dangerous. In the quiet hours of the night, when the moon hung low and the village was still, Gulmakai often found herself wondering about the woman who had married her father. Sholaidolai had always been beautiful, almost unnaturally so, her dark hair cascading like a veil, her sharp features giving her an almost regal air. She was everything Gulmakai was not, cold, commanding, and always in control. But there was a harshness in her beauty, a chilling edge to her smile that made Gulmakai uneasy. As she reflected on the mysterious whispers, Gulmakai began piecing together the scattered details of her stepmother's past. She learned that before she had come to the village, Sholaidolai had been married once before to a wealthy man from a nearby town. But that marriage had ended in tragedy, shrouded in mystery. The man had vanished without a trace, leaving no clue as to where he had gone. Some villagers said he had run off, but others, the ones with darker eyes and quieter voices, murmured that it was Sholaidolai who had something to do with his disappearance. They spoke in hushed tones about how her first husband had grown ill, weak, and terrified after their marriage, as if he had been cursed. The more Gulmakai heard, the more she wondered. Was it possible that her stepmother was involved in something darker than just cruelty? One evening, as Gulmakai sat alone by the hearth, she overheard a conversation between two elderly women who had known Sholai before she had come to their village. One woman, her face lined with age and wisdom, spoke with a mixture of fear and reluctance. She was beautiful, yes, the woman said softly, but there was always something unnatural about her. After her first husband disappeared, people started whispering about her. They say she used dark magic to make him hers. Power, that's what she wanted. She wanted to control everyone around her. The other woman shuddered. I heard she performed rituals, the kind of rituals that summon forces beyond our world. Some say she made a pact with something terrible, but no one would dare confront her. She's not someone you cross, not even in whispers. The words haunted Gulmarkai long after the conversation ended. Was her stepmother really capable of such dark deeds? Was it possible that Sholai cruelty towards her was part of a much darker plan, one that she couldn't yet understand? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the stepmother she saw every day was not the same woman the villagers whispered about. There was something hidden, something powerful lurking beneath the surface. As days passed, Gulmarkai's curiosity grew. She began to watch Sholai more closely, noticing things she hadn't before. Sholai often left the house late at night, cloaked in darkness, her steps silent as she slipped into the woods. Gulmarkai couldn't shake the feeling that her stepmother was meeting someone from her past. It was not just the strange disappearances or the coldness that made her suspicious, but the quiet secrecy with which Sholai moved. It was like she was hiding something. One evening, after Sholai left the house once again, Gulmarkai decided to follow her. She moved quietly through the trees, staying out of sight as she trailed her stepmother. The path was long, winding deeper into the forest, and the air grew colder as she ventured further. Eventually, Gulmarkai arrived at a clearing, where she saw her stepmother standing before a dark figure. The figure was hooded, its face hidden in the shadows, but Gulmarkai could tell that Sholai was speaking to them, her voice low and urgent. The figure nodded in agreement, and they exchanged something, some kind of object, though Gulmarkai couldn't see it clearly. Gulmarkai's heart raced. What was going on? Was this part of Sholai's dark past? Was this the ritual the villagers had whispered about? The encounter left her shaken, but it also ignited something inside her. She needed to know more. Her curiosity was no longer just a passing thought. It had become an obsession. She had to uncover the truth about her stepmother's past, no matter the cost. The mysteries surrounding Sholai were beginning to unravel, and Gulmarkai was determined to see where the trail led. She could no longer ignore the shadows that lingered in her home, nor the whispers of darkness that followed her stepmother wherever she went. One rainy afternoon, as Gulmarkai went about her endless chores, she was tasked with cleaning the attic, a place she had never been particularly fond of. The attic was old, filled with dust and cobwebs, its narrow windows barely letting any light in. It was a room that seemed to hold memories of another time, with old trunks and forgotten belongings stacked haphazardly in every corner. She had been in the attic before, but never with much attention. Today, however, something about the room felt different, almost as though it was calling to her. As Gulmarkai sorted through the piles of forgotten items, she noticed a chest in the far corner of the room, tucked away beneath an old sheet. It was made of dark, weathered wood, its edges worn from years of neglect. Intrigued, she moved closer, her heart pounding with an inexplicable sense of urgency. The chest was locked, but there was something about it, a strange pull, that made her feel as though she needed to open it. She searched the attic for a key and, after some time, found it hidden in a drawer nearby. With trembling hands, Gulmarkai unlocked the chest, the hinges creaking as it opened. Inside, she found a collection of old letters, yellowed with age, along with several photographs and a small, delicate pendant, a piece of jewelry that seemed strangely familiar. She picked up the pendant first, feeling its weight in her hands, and her heart skipped a beat. It was her mother's. She recognized it immediately. She had seen her mother wear it often, the pendant glimmering in the light as she would hold Gulmakai in her arms. How could it be here? What was it doing in this chest? Gulmakai's curiosity intensified, and she carefully unrolled one of the letters. The handwriting was elegant, but the words it contained were not what she expected. They were written in a language she didn't understand, but as she continued reading, she began to make sense of the fragments. The letter spoke of dark practices, of forbidden rituals and magic that could bend the will of others. It described how a woman, driven by a hunger for power, had used these dark arts to control the minds of those around her, to manipulate and dominate. The words were chilling, and Gulmakai felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She recognized the woman described in the letter. It was Sholaidolai. The letters went on to explain the full extent of the ritual. Sholaidolai, in her youth, had been desperate for power. She had performed a forbidden ritual to gain control over those around her, using black magic to bind their wills to hers. It was a dangerous, ancient practice, one that required great sacrifices and left lasting marks on the soul. But the most disturbing part of the letters was the prophecy, one that had been written in secret, a curse that would follow Sholaidolai for the rest of her life. The prophecy spoke of a child, born from a union that was not meant to be, a child who would bear the mark of the true heir to the family's legacy. This child, the letter revealed, was Gulmakai. She had inherited more than just her mother's eyes and her father's smile. She was the key to a powerful curse. If Sholaidolai ever mistreated the true heir of the family, the curse would take hold and bring destruction upon her. The curse would not only haunt Sholaidolai's life, but would also unravel the magic she had worked so hard to control. But there was hope, a chance to break the curse, but only if the heir survived the trials that would come. Gulmakai's hands trembled as she read the final lines of the letter. The trials were no small matter. They would test her in ways she could not yet understand. But they were the only way to break the curse. It was as though the universe had set her on a path she had no choice but to follow. She was no longer just a victim of her stepmother's cruelty. She was part of something much larger, something ancient and powerful. She sat there for a long time, her mind racing. The revelations were overwhelming. Sholaidolai's cruelty, her mistreatment of Gulmakai, had not been a mere product of her bitterness or jealousy. It was all part of a much darker design. Her stepmother had been trying to suppress Gulmakai's true nature, to keep her from fulfilling the prophecy and unlocking the power that lay within her. But why? Was Sholaidolai afraid of what Gulmakai might become? Or was there something even more sinister at play? The pendant, the letters, the curse. They all pointed to the same conclusion. Gulmakai was the key to breaking the dark hold that had plagued her stepmother for years, but to do so, she would need to survive the trials ahead. And that, she realized, was the most terrifying part. Could she overcome the darkness that had already claimed her stepmother's soul? Or would she, too, fall victim to the power that had cursed her family? As Gulmakai sat in the attic, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her, she knew that her life would never be the same again. The secrets that had been buried in the shadows for so long were now out in the open, and she could no longer pretend that everything would be all right. Her journey had just begun, and the trials awaiting her would test every ounce of strength she had. But one thing was clear. Her path was now tied to the very fate of Sholaidolai and the future of their family. Gulmakai's world had shifted irreversibly after her discovery in the attic. The flood of revelations, her stepmother's dark past, the curse, and her own potential as the key to breaking it, had transformed her. Gone was the passive, quiet girl who had once been a mere victim of Sholaidolai's cruelty. The girl who had silently borne the weight of oppression was now a young woman, fueled by a sense of purpose and the burning desire for justice. She knew she had to prepare for what was to come. Sholaidolai, despite her arrogance and cruel nature, had weaknesses. Gulmakai now understood those weaknesses better than anyone. The magic Sholaidolai had once wielded, her dark, twisted powers, could be her downfall, and Gulmakai was determined to turn them against her. But to do so, she needed more than just the knowledge contained in the letters. She needed strength, allies, and a strategy. In the silence of the attic, surrounded by her mother's pendant and the ancient texts, Gulmakai began to study the rituals Sholaidolai had once practiced. The letters detailed incantations, symbols, and ways to tap into powers that lay hidden in the world. Powers that were neither light nor dark, but a dangerous mix of both. Gulmakai found herself drawn to these practices, learning not only about her stepmother's magic, but about her own latent abilities. Though she had never realized it before, she had the potential to tap into the same forces. Her heritage, her bloodline. These things were more than just a mark of her ancestry. They were a key to unlocking a power she had never understood. As Gulmakai pored over the ancient texts, she began to experiment, quietly and cautiously. She practiced small rituals, harmless at first, just simple gestures and words. But over time, she felt a strange connection, a growing power within her that she had never known existed. It was as though the spirits of her ancestors were watching over her, guiding her, helping her awaken something deep inside. Though the magic was foreign to her, she could feel its pulse, like a heartbeat, steady and sure. With each passing day, she grew more confident, but magic alone wouldn't be enough. She needed help, and help she would find among the very people who had been too afraid to challenge Sholaidolai. Gulmakai knew there were those in the village who had witnessed the cruelty of her stepmother, but fear had kept them silent. Yet now, with the knowledge of the curse and the prophecy in her hands, she realized that those villagers might be her greatest asset. The first person she approached was an old healer named Amina. Amina was one of the few villagers who had seen beyond the veil of superstition and fear. She was a quiet woman, deeply connected to the land and the natural world, known for her remedies and deep understanding of herbs. Amina had seen Gulmakai's suffering from afar, but like many others, had been too fearful of Sholaidolai's wrath to intervene. One evening, when the sun had dipped below the horizon and the village was wrapped in darkness, Gulmakai visited Amina in her small cottage on the outskirts of the village. Amina welcomed her with a knowing look, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "I knew you would come," Amina said softly as she prepared tea. "You're not the kind of girl who would remain silent forever." Gulmakai hesitated, but then spoke, her voice steady. "I know what Sholaidolai is. I know what she's done. And I know what she'll do if I don't stop her. I can't do it alone." Amina studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You're stronger than you realize. I'll help you. The magic she uses is dark, but there is light in this world too. Together, we can fight it." With Amina's support, Gulmakai's plan began to take shape, but they needed more. Amina spoke of a man, a stranger, who had been lurking on the outskirts of the village for some time. He was someone who had been watching over Gulmakai, though she had never known it. His name was Farid, a traveller with a mysterious past, and he had been sent by forces beyond the village to keep an eye on her. Farid had arrived in the village some years ago, claiming to be just another wanderer, but his eyes held secrets. He had learned of the curse and the trials, and he knew that Gulmakai was the only one who could break it. He had trained in secret, studying the ways of ancient magic, learning how to harness the forces of both light and shadow. When Gulmakai met him, it was in the woods, just outside the village. Farid appeared out of the shadows, his presence calm and steady, like the forest itself. There was something about him that made Gulmakai trust him instantly. His words were few, but they carried the weight of knowledge. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice low and assuring. "I've been watching over you for a reason. The prophecy is real and you have the power to change everything. But you'll need more than just magic. You'll need strength, and you'll need allies who believe in you." Together with Amina and Farid, Gul Makai began to craft a plan to confront Shalaidolai, to expose her for the dark sorceress she was, and to break the curse that had plagued her family for generations. But the road ahead would be fraught with danger, and every step they took seemed to stir the winds of fate. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen in the village. The crops began to fail, the animals grew restless, and the weather turned violent. The skies darkened with storms that seemed unnatural, and the ground trembled with an unsettling energy. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, sensing that something was wrong, but they didn't know what to make of it. Gul Makai felt the curse closing in on her, the weight of it pressing down on her every move. But despite the mounting tension, she remained resolute. The time had come to face Shalaidolai, to confront the woman who had tormented her for so long, and to finally take control of her destiny. The trials had begun, and Gul Makai knew that she would have to fight not only for her own life, but for the future of everyone around her. The storm raged fiercely that night. The wind howled through the trees, and the heavy rain pelted the earth in an unrelenting downpour. Gul Makai stood at the edge of the dense forest, her heart pounding in her chest, her thoughts clearer than ever. This was the moment, the final confrontation that would determine her fate and the fate of her family. The forest around her felt alive with an ancient energy, as if the very trees were holding their breath, waiting for what was to come. The path ahead was dark, but Gul Makai wasn't afraid. She had already faced the worst of what life could throw at her. Shalaidolai's cruelty, the secrets of her past, the curse that hung over her head. All of it had led to this. She had discovered her own power, her true heritage, and now it was time to use it. Shalaidolai had always known that her stepdaughter was different. Now Gul Makai knew why. The curse, the dark rituals, the control that Shalaidolai had exerted over everyone in her life. It was all coming to a head. The final battle would take place here, in the very heart of the forest where Shalaidolai had performed her forbidden rituals in her youth. Gul Makai entered the forest cautiously, every step deliberate. The rain soaked her through, but she barely noticed. Her focus was sharp, her mind prepared for whatever might come. She didn't know exactly where Shalaidolai was, but she trusted that the dark energy in the air would guide her. She was the heir to the family legacy, the key to breaking the curse, and Shalaidolai was about to learn that her time was over. As Gul Makai ventured deeper into the forest, she saw a flicker of movement ahead. A figure emerged from the shadows, standing tall and unyielding, the figure of Shalaidolai. Her stepmother's face was twisted in a grimace, her eyes dark and calculating. The woman who had once been so powerful, so untouchable, now looked cornered and desperate. "I knew you would come," Shalaidolai said, her voice low and filled with venom. "But you're too late, Gul Makai. This forest is mine. It's where I gained my power, and it will be where I finally rid myself of you." Gul Makai didn't flinch. "You don't scare me anymore, Shalaidolai," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I know what you've done. I know about the dark magic, the curse, and I know about the truth of my mother's death. It's over." Shalaidolai's expression shifted. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she quickly masked it with a sneer. "You think you understand?" she spat, taking a step closer, her hands crackling with dark energy. "You think you're some kind of hero, Gul Makai. You don't know anything." With those words, Shalaidolai's magic erupted in a wave of raw power. The ground trembled beneath Gul Makai's feet, and the trees around them groaned as if responding to the magic. Dark tendrils of shadow shot out, trying to bind her, but Gul Makai was ready. She raised her hand, and for the first time, she felt the pulse of energy flow through her, the same energy she had tapped into during her studies of the ancient rituals. It was her heritage, her birthright. The first clash was intense. Sholidolai's dark energy collided with Gulmakai's newfound magic, creating a storm of force that split the air. Lightning crackled above them, illuminating the chaotic scene. Gulmakai's heart raced, but she focused, drawing on the power of her ancestors, using the pendant her mother had once worn as a conduit. The pendant hummed with energy, guiding her, strengthening her resolve. In that moment, Sholidolai's voice rang out, filled with spite and fury. "Do you think you can defeat me with your pathetic magic? You're nothing but a child. You don't know what you're up against." Gulmakai's mind flashed back to the letters she had found in the attic, the words written by her mother. The curse, the ritual, the prophecy, they had all led her here. She remembered the last line of the prophecy. Only the true heir can break the curse and banish the darkness. With that thought, a surge of power filled her. The storm around them seemed to intensify, as if the very elements themselves were aligning with her. Gulmakai closed her eyes for a moment, drawing the power of the earth, the air, and the fire that surged around her. When she opened her eyes again, they were glowing with a fierce light. The curse had awakened something in her, a power far stronger than Sholidolai could have ever anticipated. With a single, decisive motion, Gulmakai raised her hand, and a blast of light shot forward, slamming into Sholidolai's dark magic. The impact sent Sholidolai stumbling backward, her face twisted in horror and disbelief. "No, this can't be happening!" she screamed, her control slipping as the curse she had placed on herself started to unravel. As the light from Gulmakai's magic swirled around them, Sholidolai's strength waned. The power she had so carefully cultivated for years began to collapse, weakened by the very curse she had placed on herself. She tried to flee, but Gulmakai was faster. The pendant around her neck glowed brightly, and with a wave of her hand, she summoned the ancient knowledge she had uncovered. Symbols, incantations, rituals. In a final act of defiance, Sholidolai attempted one last spell, one last desperate attempt to control the situation. But it was too late. The curse had already taken its toll on her, and Gulmakai's magic was too powerful. With a final, overwhelming surge of energy, Gulmakai cast the spell that would end the darkness forever. Sholidolai's scream echoed through the forest, but it was quickly silenced. The shadows around her faded, and the storm that had raged so fiercely began to calm. Gulmakai stood there, breathing heavily, the pendant in her hand, now glowing softly, a symbol of her victory. The forest, once filled with dark magic, was now quiet. Gulmakai had broken the curse. Sholidolai's reign of terror had come to an end. And as the storm clouds parted and the first rays of dawn broke through, Gulmakai knew that the trials were over. She had won, not just for herself, but for the entire village, and for her family. As the storm began to subside, and the first light of dawn touched the forest, Gulmakai stood still, her heart still racing from the battle. Her stepmother, Sholidolai, was gone. Her reign of cruelty had ended. Gulmakai's chest swelled with the relief of victory, but something was wrong. The air was thick, charged with an unsettling energy. She looked down at the pendant in her hand, its soft glow flickering as if it were alive. For a moment, it seemed like the storm had taken all the dark magic with it, but a strange chill crept over her. Her fingers tightened around the pendant, and that's when she felt it, an undeniable shift, as though the pendant had just changed its nature. Suddenly, her vision blurred. She stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The ground beneath her seemed to shake as shadows began to swirl around her once more. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered from the depths of the pendant. "You cannot escape your fate, Gulmakai." Confusion gripped her. She stumbled back in horror as the shadows swirled tighter around her, pulling at her, binding her. It was the same dark energy she had witnessed in Sholidolai's magic. But now, it wasn't just surrounding her, it was inside her. The pendant had revealed its true power. Gulmakai realized with a sickening jolt that the curse wasn't broken. It had simply passed from Sholidolai to her. With dread pooling in her stomach, Gulmakai turned around to see a group of villagers slowly approaching her from the shadows of the trees. Their faces were filled with solemn recognition, but there was no fear in their eyes, only quiet resignation. "You can't undo it, Gulmakai," one of the villagers, an elder woman, said softly, stepping forward. "The curse. It was never just on Shalaidolai. It has always been on her bloodline. On your bloodline." Gulmakai's heart sank as the weight of the words settled over her like a heavy blanket. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The pendant," the woman continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It was a tool of control, a mark of the curse. You were always meant to take Shalaidolai's place. The curse bound her to the family's fate, but now it binds you." A sharp pain shot through Gulmakai's chest as the realization hit her. She was the true heir, yes, but the curse that had plagued her family for generations wasn't so easily broken. It had passed on to her, and now she was bound to it. Her mind raced as the villagers watched in silence, awaiting her reaction. The pendant glowed once more, this time brighter than before, and Gulmakai could feel its pull, its insidious power. But she could also feel something else, a way out, a choice. The elder spoke again, this time with an edge of sorrow in her voice. "You are the key to breaking the curse, but it comes at a price. You must choose to free yourself, and in doing so, save the village, or to bind the curse forever to your own soul. The choice is yours." A knot formed in Gulmakai's throat as she looked at the villagers, the people who had suffered because of the curse, who had watched in silence, afraid to intervene. Their faces were worn with years of hardship, with fear, with suffering. It wasn't just her family who had been doomed by this curse. It had affected everyone in this village. The twisted cycle had lingered for generations, but what would it cost her to break the curse completely? The pendant glowed fiercely, as if answering her silent question. "It will take your life," it seemed to whisper. "It will take everything." Gulmakai's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, each second more unbearable than the last. If she chose freedom for herself, the curse would finally end for the village. If she kept the curse bound to her, the village would continue to suffer, but she would remain free of the darkness. She closed her eyes, the storm within her heart matching the one that had raged through the night. Could she sacrifice herself for the people who had stood by, silently watching her pain? Could she really let them suffer forever? Her hands trembled as she clutched the pendant one last time, and in that moment, she understood. The curse wasn't just about power. It was about choice. Her sacrifice might save the village, but it could cost her everything she had fought for. The pendant's light flickered one final time, and Gulmakai made her choice. The battle was not yet over. The forest fell silent, the storm having long passed, leaving behind only the remnants of its fury. The pendant in Gulmakai's hand dimmed, its once bright glow now fading into an eerie stillness. Her decision had been made, but it had come at a steep price. The curse that had plagued her family for generations was finally broken, its hold over the villagers shattered forever. But the victory came with a bittersweet consequence. Gulmakai's body felt weightless, as if the very fabric of her existence had been undone. The price of breaking the curse had been her own soul, binding her to the world between the living and the dead. The villagers, unaware of the depths of her sacrifice, cheered with relief, free from the oppressive shadow of Shalaidolai's cruelty. They rejoiced, rebuilt their homes, and began their lives anew, never knowing the full extent of what Gulmakai had given them. But Gulmakai, now a spirit, could not remain among them. Her presence lingered only in the quiet whispers of the wind, the soft rustling of the trees. She had freed them, but at the cost of her own place in the world. As a wandering spirit, she would never find rest, never know the warmth of a family again. But she found peace in knowing that the village was safe, that the curse had been broken and the suffering had ended. The villagers, though unaware of the full sacrifice, never forgot her. Gulmakai's name became a legend, passed down through generations. Her story was told by the firesides in hushed tones and wide-eyed wonder as a tale of resilience, sacrifice, and courage. It became a lesson for the children, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, there is always the power to stand up and fight for what is right. And so, the girl who had endured the worst of life's hardships became a symbol of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Gulmakai's story lived on, woven into the very fabric of the village's history. Her legacy as an unsung hero, a silent guardian, forever remembered in the hearts of those she saved.